Hi AP. Okay, this is the Barron's Practice Test 1, Section 2, Free Response, question number 5. Okay, this is where you have to realize the figured base. You should know that the scoring for this question on the AP exam is out of 25 points. Okay, you get 7 points for identifying the correct Roman and Arabic numeral chord symbols. That's 1 point each for a total of 7. Then you get 6 points, 1 point each for each chord spelling. And then the remaining 12 points has to deal with your voice leading, which is 2 points per connection between chords, totaling 25 points. So we're going to go ahead and get things started here. I really strongly advise you that before you start any of these questions to really read the directions carefully. It says you are to realize the figured base below in 4 voices following traditional 18th century voice leading procedures. Continue in the same fashion from the spacing of the first chord, which is given to you. In the space below each chord, fill in the appropriate Roman numeral chord symbol and inversion. So let's get started with this. Get bigger. Okay, I'm going to use my red pen so we can see my responses. So anyway, you should know there are possible variables in this solution of this figured base exercise, but what is not a variable is the correct chord analysis, which is this. Okay. Having the correct Roman numeral and Arabic figures in your analysis will lead you to the correct chord members. So start with that correct information first, and then you'll be well on your way to success. Now, the figured base 4+ right here means the note that is the interval of a fourth above the bass note is going to be raised. You should know that the 4-2 chord also indicates a 7th chord that's in third inversion with the 7th of the chord in the bass, which must resolve to the 1-6. Because if you think about it, that's Fa going down to May from the dominant 7th chord. In G minor, the supertonic 7th chord is half diminished, so hopefully you put the half diminished symbol there and didn't just leave it as a 2 diminished 6-5. There is a half cadence at the end, and the sharp sign under the final chord, right here, indicates to raise the note a third above the bass to the F sharp, which is the leading tone. So once you have your figured bass, Roman numerals, like so, then I always like to start making a soprano line, which indeed happens to be the melody. So again, I'm going to show you what I came up with, but there are possibilities with your voice leading. So I'll show you now. So I have a nice descending soprano melodic line. And I can't forget about that F sharp there because that's the third above the bass. Stems up. There's my soprano line. Now I'll supply the alto line as to what I came up with. Hopefully you have the same spelling of the 7th chords and the triads that are in this example that I do. All the same harmonic rhythm, so we have to end with a half note. Okay, so I have to put an F sharp here by the alto because that's what the plus sign indicates in the figured bass. Stems down. Next is my tenor voice. Tenors are going up. Tenors will stay. Common tones can be kept, like so. I can have that leap of a fourth. And then stems up for tenors. And that's what I came up with for my response. What I also decided to do, and we're going to talk about this really soon, and I'm going to use green, is I decided to make the soprano melodic line a little bit more interesting by supplying a non-chord tone. That non-chord tone I just added in the soprano is a passing tone. Technically, it's an unaccented passing tone, as it passes between the A and the F sharp. And that's the sort of thing that you can do as well if you feel comfortable with non-chord tones after we study that. So, this is our example for number 5, one possible solution. I'd love to see what you came up with. For question 6, you need to part right to Roman numerals. So the scoring on the AP exam, this is out of 18 points. Okay, you get 6 points for chord spelling, which is 1 point each, because you have to spell 6 chords. Okay, and then you get 12 points for your voice leading. That is 2 points per connection between chords, for a total of 18 points. Again, I urge you to read the directions carefully. It says you are to write the following progression in 4 voices following 18th century voice leading procedures. Continue in the same fashion from the spacing of the first chord, which is given to you. And here's where things get interesting. Use only 1/8, quarter, and half notes. So you're limited to those specific rhythms only. Okay, so let me zoom in. I'll use red, and we can see what I came up with. So here in this exercise, hopefully you realize that this actually contains 2 secondary dominants. We have a diatonic 5/7 chord, and then we have a 4/3 suspension. Okay, a secondary function 7th chord always includes an accidental. Let me repeat that. A secondary function 7th chord always includes an accidental, right? Because we have what sounds like tonicization happening, where we have a new leading tone. And the 4/3 suspension is right here, and that's going to make a lot more sense after we study our non-chord tones. For now, that simply means that we have a root position D major triad, so D will be in the bass, and then one of the voices above the bass needs to suspend the 4th note above the bass, so that would be the G, and then resolve down to the 3rd note above the bass, which is the F sharp. So I'll show you exactly how I did this. Going to start with my bass first. Hopefully you came up with the same bass notes as I did. There's our secondary dominant that has the leading tone in the bass. Oops, let's erase that. Now, if you had some of these bass notes down the octave, that would be fine. For example, the 4 chord, if you put the G down the octave, and then in the next measure, the first beat, the secondary dominant, if that G sharp, and then let's say the A was down the octave, that would certainly be fine as well. Okay, now I'm going to write a soprano line. And I will put my stems up for soprano. Like so. Next up, I'll deal with tenor. Okay, so that's a secondary dominant chord right there. There's my accidental for the tenor, A sharp. That will go up to a B. I'll keep them on a B. I'll again keep the tenor on a B. Now we'll go up to an E and down to a D. Here's my tenor voice. Now we'll deal with altos. Keep common tones in the same voice. Let me write my stems down for alto. And I chose the alto voice to have the 4-3 suspension. So that means that the altos will not be singing a half note on one pitch, but they'll be singing 2 quarter notes on different pitches. So what's a fourth above the D? A G. What's a third above the D? An F sharp. And that's what I did there for the altos. And there is my progression. Okay? So remember that the chord underneath the slash in those secondary dominants is a temporary tonic. Okay? I can tell you that the errors that are most often committed in questions 5 and 6 on the AP exam is that you have wrong chord members, or you forget to include your accidentals, and you fail to resolve the leading tone or the 7th of the chord correctly. Of course, then you're going back and you're making sure that upper voices don't exceed an octave in length. In distance, you're going to check for any parallel motion that might be illegal, any voice crossing, and so on and so forth. But this would be a possible solution for number 6. I'd love to see how you did. Okay, now we're moving on to practice test 2. This is section 2, question 5, where you have to realize the figured bass. So again, read the directions carefully. You are to realize the figured bass below in 4 voices following traditional 18th century voice leading procedures. Continue in the same fashion from the spacing of the first chord, which is given to you. In the space below each chord, fill in the appropriate Roman numeral chord, symbol, and inversion. Okay, so this one was, I think, a little bit harder than question 5 from practice test 1. So let's look carefully, and I'm going to supply the Roman numeral analysis, and you can check your work. Use red. Here we go. So right after the 1 chord, we open up with a 7, fully diminished 6-5, followed by a 1-6 to a 4. This next chord is the secondary dominant. What gives it away is the /6. And it's a secondary dominant in second inversion. And then it goes to the 4 chord. 4 chord is temporary tonic. Goes to the 4 chord in first inversion. And then we have this wonderful cadential 6-4 chord at the end. Sol, sol, do in the bass. 1-6-4. That's the 7th chord because of the 7. Dominant 7th because of the sharp. We have to raise the 3rd. Ending on a minor 1. That's my Roman numeral analysis. So you see that the figured bass realization has a fully diminished leading tone chord in the first inversion, the very first chord after the 1 chord, and then it has a secondary dominant triad in second inversion. Both function as passing chords. Now notice that the temporary tonicization of the subdominant, which is 4, provides us with an opportunity to create a sequence, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. I wrote a sequence in the melody. But you have to be very careful when you look at the figured bass symbols, okay? In this example, the sharp 6-4 and the 6-4 have the same note in the bass, right? A G. I'll say that again. the /6/4 and the 6/4 chord have both a G in the bass. The only difference is that they differ in pitch. One's going to have an E natural, the other one's going to have an E flat. So the /6 is a good indicator that we're going up a sixth from the G, which is going to be an E natural, which is a leading tone towards the temporary tonic, F, which is 4 in C minor. Now that I have the bass line, I've got my Roman numeral analysis, which I think is accurate. I'm going to make a soprano melody. Right off the bat, I've got to make that a natural, a B natural. Why? Well, because I have a slash through the 6. That's going to go back to Do. And then we're going to make the sopranos jump up here to their nice melody. Like so. And I've got to have an E natural here in the soprano because of the /6. Now this was the sequence that I mentioned to you before. I have my sequence. You can see I have Do, Ti, Do, C, B, C in the first measure, and then I have F, E, F in the second measure. We can call that a melodic sequence. So that's what I decided to do there. Now, when I get back to this measure here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a flat sign here, just to be very clear that we're not dealing with E natural like we did in the second measure. We're going back to E flat. And I'm keeping it a half note. Notice that the bass is singing a half note, so I want to keep it the same rhythm. And then here I have a D going to, I want a dotted half here. Don't forget about your dot. Keep the rhythm the same. Like so. Now I can put my stems on. So that's the soprano line that I created. Perhaps you did something different, and that's certainly okay. This is only one possible solution. Keep that in mind. Now I'm going to go to the tenor. And I'm going to provide the tenor with these notes. I want to avoid excessive leaps and keep common tones when possible. Now you might be doing this, I'm doing this linear, you might be doing this vertically, and that's fine. You'll develop your own system that works for you, but I encourage you to experiment. And see what works best for you. There's my tenor. Now I've got to fill in the alto voice. So I'm missing that pitch, the F, in my 7 diminished 6/5 chord. G, A, F, half note, don't forget about that, and dotted F. So this is my solution. And take a moment to check to see if you have the correct chord spelling. The correct doubling. So again, people make mistakes on this because they forget to put in the accidentals that they need. So you really have to observe your figured bass carefully. Then double check, triple check, make sure that you're not breaking any part writing and voice leading rules that we know. I'd love to see what you came up with. So let's move on to question 6. Read the directions. You are to write the following progression in 4 voices following 18th century voice leading procedures. Continue in the same fashion from the spacing of the first chord, which is given to you. Use only quarter notes and half notes. So this progression is pretty straightforward, with 1/7 chord in third inversion. You see that? That's the 5/4/2. Then we have one secondary dominant. That's the 5-6-5 of 5. And notice that it ends on a deceptive cadence. So in this one, it's really important that you make sure that you resolve the 7th of any 4-note chord, okay? So we are given the Roman numeral analysis. We need to provide notes. What do we do first? Well, I would definitely plug in the bass notes first based on your Roman numeral analysis here. So hopefully you came up with the following bass notes. Secondary dominant is going to have an accidental that's not diatonic in the key, remember? Going to the 5 and then going to the 6. There's only 3 chords in the last measure, so I need to make that last chord a half note. Keep that in mind when you're writing your rhythm. There's my bass line. Let's go to soprano. This time I'll show you vertically what we can do. So I have E, G sharp, B, and the D, the 7th is in the bass. That 5-4-2 chord must, in the bass, must resolve to a 1-6, because if you think about it, it's going Fa to Me. So when you have a 5 chord that's in 3rd inversion, it has to resolve to a 1 chord in 1st inversion. Now the alto and soprano will share that A, so the tenors can stay on the E for that chord. Moving on to the 2-6. Sopranos can sing the B, altos can drop down to the F. Tenors can sing this B, and there's our 2-6. Now I have the secondary dominant. This is going to sound like Sol, Ti, Re, Fa, but not in the key of A major. It's going to sound like Sol, Ti, Re, Fa in the key of E major. So E major is our temporary tonic here, if we were to play this. So here I have A, F sharp, and then there's my B. In the next chord, that's what I have, the 5. And here's my wonderful deceptive cadence. Like so. Go back and check that you have the correct chord spellings, that you're not breaking any part writing rules, that you have correct doubling, and so on and so forth. And I would love to see how you did. Okay, now AP, I'm going to go back and play all of my possible solutions that I came up with so you can hear what they sound like. So I'm going to start with practice test 1. This is question number 5 in G minor. Here is my possible solution that I came up with. Listen carefully. And you can hear that passing tone. Now listen for the 5-4-2 chord. You can hear the bass going Fa down to Me. Turn to question 6 and listen to my possible solution that I came up with. You'll hear some secondary dominants in this one, and then at the end you'll hopefully hear that 4-3 suspension sound like Fa Mi. Here's D major. Here's my solution. once again. Moving on to practice test 2, this is question number 5 in C minor, 3/4. You will hear the 7 diminished 6/5 chord. You'll hear the secondary dominant, and you'll hear the cadential 6/4 at the end, sol, sol, do in the bass. Let's listen to my possible solution. Here it is again. Okay, let's look at practice test 2, question 6, and in further examining my voice leading, I noticed that I would probably get a point deduction because I did not make the last chord major when I spelled it. We're in A major, but they want a deceptive cadence, they want a major 6. So I would need to then provide an A sharp and not an A natural. So you have to watch very, very carefully. It happens to all of us. Okay, so here is the progression. This is my solution. I'm going to pretend that that is an A sharp at the end, so you can hear the major 6 that they're looking for. And hopefully you'll hear the 5/4-2 chord, which, remember, a 5/4-2 chord has fa in the bass, right? And fa needs to go to mi, which is why the 1/6 chord directly follows the 5/4-2. And then you'll hear the secondary dominant, that's the 5/6/5 of 5. That's T in the bass, which will go to do with the temporary tonic shift. Here is the progression of my solution. Let's listen again. And one last time. And I don't like leaving you on a deceptive cadence, AP, but there you have it. Have a great day.